Paracast. It's so funny, Gene, because anybody who listens to this show, I would hope the one thing they come away from our show with is this idea that we don't know what's going on. And that's why we keep asking the questions, because we don't have answers. You and I both have our opinions about this stuff. We both have some theories about some of what's going on, some of which we talk about on the show, some of which, I hold back because I have, in many cases, just opinions. And this is an opinion show. We try to make it more than that. And this is something that I really think is critical, and this is the main point of this little preamble, is that we should recognize this simple concept that everybody has opinions, but I think it's fair to say that some opinions are more informed than others. And everybody has an opinion, but when you go to doctors to get opinions, you're not going to weigh the opinion of any doctor the same way. Doctors that have a track record of successful treatment of certain diseases, well, I'm going to guess, reasonably, I think, that if that doctor gives you an opinion about a condition that you might think you have, and there's someone who has a track record of successfully treating it, that their opinion would be more valuable than, let's say, another doctor who's new to the field.
It's called an expert opinion.
Well,
and you know what makes it even more interesting? You know what makes this more interesting? A lot of the people who complain about us are the ones who go around saying they know the answers. Their opinion is the expert opinion. They know the truth, and they'll tell you the truth if you buy their book, if you attend their lectures, etc., etc.
Yeah. Because, then, there's no experts on so many of the topics we discuss. There are people who have read a bunch. Does that make them an expert? Maybe. I don't know. Who's an expert, and what do they use to make that claim? I'll give you a perfect example of this, right? My favorite forum member of ours, Skylar, and I know that sometimes I might call him out unfairly or too much compared to the many forum members we have, but I am in constant awe of Skylar's intellect. When Skylar expresses an opinion about something on the forums, I really take note of it. And the reason for that, Gene, is very simple. I respect the man's mind. Never met him. I very much like him, and I deeply respect him because personally I find that his approach to thinking is really clear. He's an emotional person like the rest of us. We're all people. None of us claim to be perfect. I am so far from perfect it's not even funny. And my closest friends will all confirm the fact that I'm one of the most self-deprecating people they know. To a fault, really. I constantly dump on myself. So it just makes me laugh when I see these inferences that we claim to stake out this position of having the absolute understanding and knowledge. It's like, really? When did we ever say any of this? Now, when we think we smell a charlatan, we call them out. Damn right. I think that the two of us are fairly decent thinkers. I think we're relatively intelligent as far as this world goes. And I think that both of us being native New Yorkers, and people, if they want to bash me for this, go right ahead. I think that native New Yorkers do have a bit of an edge on people maybe from other parts of the United States. I'll say that. Does that make me provincial? Well, maybe in this particular case, it does. But I think that when you've grown up...
Okay, now, you're provincial and you're a verb. Does that mean you are a provincial verb?
The Provincial Verb's a new band. Oh, man, I don't know. It seems to me, and this is just my opinion, that we really are in a time, we're living in a time when everything is being turned upside down. Certainly one could argue that in this country, in the United States, really since the Reagan years, there has been this attitude that intellect is somehow a negative thing, that, being intelligent should be frowned upon. To be inquisitive about things is somehow undesirable. Where did that come from, Gene?
Well, we now have basically a president in the U.S. who is reputedly an intellectual. He's a constitutional lawyer. So what do? They say, he is not one of us. He must be a communist. No, he's a fascist. What is he?
Well, I mean, and we always get into dangerous, dangerous waters when we even mention politics on here. You know, what is he? He's a politician. He's a lawyer, which means he's sort of a professional liar. That's part of what lawyers are, sort of like actors. You know, they're people who have been trained specifically to recognize, to understand, and to, yes, deploy deception. That's what they do. And so you look at someone like Barack Obama. He's this, he's that. Well, he's a politician, which tells you something, and he's somebody who sought out being president of the United States, which in my mind makes him a little wacky. I think anybody who wants that gig is already a little wacky. I
think anybody also who thinks that anybody would vote for them is even more wacky.
I guess so. I mean, I don't pretend to understand the mind of a politician. I don't want to understand that mindset. You know, I really don't. In the end, Gene, anybody who wants to make statements about us as people, I submit to them that they don't even know who we are. You know, people want to make judgment calls on us based on who we come across on this show. You're only seeing one little aspect of our personalities. That's all. And don't think you can know anybody in totality from listening to them on a program. That's not really intellectually honest. You know the side of me or you that we choose to put on here. We're sharing some aspect of ourselves on here, but it's not the totality of who we are. I recognize that sometimes you and I will bring somebody on the show, and sometimes we give them a hard time and ask them relevant questions. That's what now passes for giving somebody a hard time in our society today. The same society, by the way, I just want to bring up for just a moment, another little sidetrack tangent here. The same society that believes that somehow it's beneficial in the school system to level the playing field to the point where criticism is something that should be avoided. This is being taught to the youngest members of our society today, that criticism is somehow bad, it's counterproductive. We've got an entire generation, Gene, of young people in this country who cannot deal with any level of critique or critical input whatsoever. They break down. And this is the whole thing about political correctness in our school system, where, you know, you can't single out certain students for rewards. Everybody's got to get a little trophy. Everybody has to be special. We're all special snowflakes. And I understand at one level the desire to teach young people that idea. But you know what? It doesn't jibe with the way the world works. And what we're really doing is preparing, or I should say, we're ill-preparing an entire generation to deal with the real world. Because once you let these kids out into the real world and they go to get their first job, I'll tell you, I've heard stories about young new workers' parents calling an employer to complain about how their kids were treated at the first week of their job. You know, how could you be so insensitive to my child? It's like your 23-year-old college graduate is your child? Lady, it might be your kid, but he's employee 12,471, and he's screwing up. What do you want? What did you teach this kid? It's like an entire generation of wussies, man. It's unbelievable. And is it somehow productive? No. Are we seeing this reflected in so many different aspects of our society? Absolutely. Do we see this in the paranormal sandbox? Yeah, everybody's supposed to get along, and people want respect, but they don't want to earn it. That, my friend, is a trend that I have, on a personal level, very serious problems with. In my world, you want respect, you earn it. You don't earn the respect, you don't get it. It's that simple. Skylar, member of our audience who has earned all the respect, intellectual respect I can give to somebody. He's earned it. He's man, when he did that dissertation on that movie, The Man from Earth, that I recommended that our listeners watch, when he wrote this dissertation on it and posted it on Scribd, I read that thing and thought, this is a guy who's smarter than I'll ever be. I have to respect him for that.
Yes, indeed. We have an interesting guest, a very mainstream UFO researcher. Tell us about him.
Well, he might be a mainstream UFO researcher, but the work that he's done and the cases that Butch Witkowski has looked into are absolutely, well, on one level, they're mesmerizing. On another level, they're kind of terrifying. And he was brought up on our forums. There were some posts to some footage of him speaking at a conference. And so we're going to talk with Butch Witkowski today about his research work. He sounds like an intelligent, knowledgeable, diligent researcher who can't be ignored. And we have to look into his research work because I think it moves us in a direction where we can start to understand some things, perhaps, which is what we're trying to do on the Paracast. We're trying to understand some of the most elusive material available to humans today. And so we're going to have Butch Witkowski, who's going to talk to us about the rather uncomfortable topic of human mutilation cases.
Coming up next on
the Paracast.
And now for something completely different.
Hi, this is Tamar from Namecheap. We're a domain name and web hosting company, and we really care about our customers. With domain name purchases, Namecheap offers free SSL and free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers. We won't bother you with unwanted messaging in your inbox or upon checkout, but most importantly, we care about you, our customers. Your satisfaction and happiness is our primary focus because your support means so much to us. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at radio.namecheap.com for web hosting and domain name specials. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/namecheap, where we host many great contests, or become a fan of ours on Facebook at facebook.com/namecheap. See you online.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners and Gene and David. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
Hey neighbors, as we said, this episode of the Paracast is being brought to you by Audible.com, and you can download a free audiobook of your choice. And you can select from over 40,000 audiobooks and lots more, featuring bestsellers about the paranormal, about UFOs, novels. You pick it, and when you get the book that you want, just download to your Apple iPod or over 400 other devices. All right? You can download your free audiobook today at audiblepodcast.com/Paracast. That's audiblepodcast.com/Paracast. This offer only good for USA listeners.
You're in the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. You never know what's going to happen next.
Butch, we have a really good friend of the show, Don Ecker, who's been on the show a number of times. And there's one topic that's come up on the show in our discussions with him that definitely, I think, makes him a little uncomfortable based on his research work into this one particular area. And apparently this is an area that you have some particular expertise in as well. And we really are thrilled that you've agreed to come on the show to talk with us today. And that area is human mutilations, something that it's a very uncomfortable topic for rather obvious reasons. And this is why we wanted to speak with you today. But before we get into that, standard question we typically ask new guests like yourself: how did you get involved in this area of research to begin with?
Actually, it was my director here in Pennsylvania, John Ventry, who asked me to come up with a presentation for one of our conferences. And I, of course, said, no, well, you can do UFOs, we can do this, that, and the other thing. And, of course, John goes like, no, I think we ought to do something on abduction. Nobody does anything on abduction. Why don't you look into that and see what you can come up with? Mm-hmm. Well, being familiar with abduction, I never really dug into it. And then when I really dug into it, it gets quite alarming.
Now, when you say alarming, there's a video on YouTube of a presentation that you did that someone posted on our forums. Mm-hmm. And there's some really interesting numbers that come up in that presentation. I don't think it's your complete presentation; it's the highlights of it. But you say in that presentation that 30,000 people a year in this country go up genuinely missing. I was wondering if you could give us some background as to where that number comes from, where that number's derived from.
Okay. What I did was I went to the National Crime Information Center, the NCIC, which records all the crimes committed in the United States and logs them. Gets their numbers on how many murders and how many robberies and how many thefts and et cetera. So I went to the missing persons area and just looked up 2008. In 2008, there were 778,000 persons reported missing. But you got to remember, 95% of those are pretty much found, and the causes for those disappearances are runaways, spousal abuse, mental illness, random demands, murder victims. Another 75% are teenage runaways under the age of 18, really. But there's 5%.
Pretty common stuff, yeah.
Yeah, then there's 5% or 38,000 that are never found or heard from again. So the numbers were kind of intriguing, so I went back to 1990. And I came up with 13,861,065 people missing. Missing reports were filed in the United States. That does not count anything but the United States.
Right.
Places like Nigeria and Yemen, they don't even count missing persons. They don't have any records. There's no background. But when you take that and just take that 5% of that, that comes up to 693,000 men, women, and children never found in a 19-year period. If you break it down by the year, it comes out to like 31,000 people are missing every year that they're just never heard from again. They're never found. No bodies, no ransom demands, nothing. They're just gone. They're wiped off the face of the earth.
That seems like a very uncomfortable number. And certainly there are people who say, well, all right, you have that many people going missing every year in the country. Of that number, what percentage potentially are people who the bodies are simply lost to the elements, lost to predators? I mean, presumably if you strip away all of that, you're still left with some vast number of people who, and you're saying you look back into this going back 19 years, 20 years almost, that this has been a fairly consistent thing.
Yes.
Do you have reason to believe that those numbers are, if you went and you were somehow able to do a global analysis of this, based on what you've looked at, do you think there's a possibility that that number could be sort of mirrored in other countries, which at that point would take us into, potentially hundreds of thousands of people completely missing a year? We're extrapolating, obviously, but do you see any reason to think that that's not a possibility?
Oh, no, I think it's a distinct possibility. Abduction is a strange phenomenon, but, when I started really looking into it, it really happens in Western countries, United States, England, English-speaking countries, countries that are more advanced. There are very few that you find, like in Africa, Southern Africa, China, and of course, there's a political reason you're not going to find out anything.
Right.
But the numbers, you're right, they're alarming. And if you just took the numbers from the United States and just took a percentage of those, take half that number, you're talking about millions of people a year.
That's sobering
I'm just
stuff.
not coming up with an answer, and the more I get into it, the more it just gets more baffling. It's, why are these people, and one of the things I did find, though, it doesn't stretch across. There's no border. It's not just like the poor guy on the street living in a cardboard box in New York City, or the debonair and walking down the streets of Spain. It's anybody. Some of the cases, and there are very few of them that you can really look into, because in the field of ufology, human mutilation or mutes it's an absolute no-no. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. They say it's bad for the ufology community, and I'm thinking well, it may be bad for the ufology community, but it's a lot worse for the people who have been abducted or missing.
Absolutely. Well, what you of course run into, there's so many people, and this is a wall we hit all the time, Butch, where people come to this table with their minds made up about what it is they're trying to research, and it's this classical dilemma where you're talking about stuff where potentially Space Brothers concerned about our evolution and about our treatment of the planet do not appear to fit very well into the scenario that you're describing, when you've got human mutilations that seem in many respects to reflect what we see in some of the more anomalous cattle mutilations. It doesn't really jive up real well with, well, they're here to make us be better towards the planet. That's not the message we're getting here. We're getting a message that, in fact, we're a resource of some sort. I mean, that's sort of what it looks like. And so let's drill down specifically. And the reason I asked you about your background, Butch, is that in the presentation you say that, and I was just wondering about this, that you had been working in homicide for a number of years. So when you're looking at reports about mutilated bodies, you have some technical understanding of what it is you're reading.
Yeah, my background is basically military and law enforcement, and along with the research, I've probably been at it all about 26 years now. And, when I look at an autopsy report or I read a story or doing a little research and, certain things pop out at me that just, I guess to the normal researcher with no background of any type would just go like, oh, well, that's interesting. But when I started reading something, I see that same thing popping up in one case after the other. I'm developing a trend, and then I'm developing a real scary thought here that, I don't think I want to shake the little gray guy's hand anymore. I think I want to run if I see him.
Let's drill down into the Todd Cease case, one that is one of the best-known cases, certainly one of the most paradoxical cases. Assuming that a listener has never heard about Todd Cease and what happened to him, could you give us the background?
Well, the Todd Cease case, I started looking at about 3 years ago, and only because it was brought up at a conference I attended. And I thought, geez, that's strange. Never really heard much about it. And then when I started looking into it, this thing has more twists and turns than the Grand Prix of Monte Carlo. You get a lot of the information you get, although there's some first-hand information and some first-hand reports, a lot of it's second- and third-hand party, and that's not really the ideal way to investigate anything anymore. Todd Cease was a 39-year-old white male from Northumberland County, Pennsylvania, who on August 4, 2006, decides he's going to go spot some preseason deer up on Montour Ridge, which is located kind of right behind the residence. It's not a really big mountain or anything like that. It's more or less of a good-sized hill. Tells her he'll be back around noon, and he takes off on his ATV about 5:30 in the morning. And about 2 o'clock when he doesn't return, of course, the wife gets a little concerned and gets a hold of the Point Township Police, and searches mounted by the local fire department, state and local police, and volunteers. Divers search a pond on the property. They come up with nothing. About 6 square miles of Montour Ridge is searched. The only thing they ever find is Mr. Cease's ATV on top of the ridge. It's intact, no accident, full of gas, and the key's in the ignition, and the engine's off. No footprints are found around the vehicle. Search dogs and cadaver dogs find no scent of Mr. Cease, but a boot worn by Mr. Cease that day is up in a tree about 70 feet off the ground. No other articles of clothing are found, and again, like I said, no footprints or anything like that, drag marks or, evidence of any disturbance or a fight or an attack by an animal. So the day goes through, the whole day with the search, and then it's called off for the evening, and it kind of resumes in the morning, and about 2:30, 3 o'clock, some firefighters spot something that looks stark white in a thicket of brush near the pond. And you got to bear in mind that this area is only about 150 miles from Mr. Cease's home, and it's been searched and walked around many times by searchers, search dogs.
So they had been over that particular area and had not seen anything the day before.
Many times. Okay. They had to walk back and forth in that area to get to the Montour Ridge trail or little dugout or however you get up to the top there.
Right.
And it was, so the firefighters, had to cut through this really thick, really tough brush, and there laid the body of Todd Cease, clad only in his underwear. There was a dead rattlesnake laying about 3 foot away from the body. Body showed no signs of trauma, with the exception of a mark on his left temple. and a lot of scratches from the thorny bush that he was found in. Quick examination showed there was no snake bites to the corpse, and the snake was in the same emaciated state that Mr. Cease was. When I started this investigation, I'd been contacted by a member of the Cease family who really tore into me about saying that, Todd was abducted by aliens and killed by aliens, and I kind of told him right out. I said, well, I don't know that, and neither do I know the correct reason why he died. It's just kind of weird the way this goes on. And but I did promise him one thing. I said, one way or the other, I'll try to get as much of this truth out as I can. The Point Township Police did not suspect any foul play whatsoever, and they were just waiting for toxicology results from the autopsy, and that was inconclusive. It took them 6 to 8 weeks, and in the meantime, during that period, a farmer and some fishermen who were in the area that day reported a disc-shaped object appeared out of nowhere above some power lines, which do run across the top of the ridge. And they said they saw a light come out of the craft and something being pulled into the craft, which they couldn't describe. Then a rescue worker comes forward, and he says, well, the FBI were questioning people in the area and asking them, what they knew about the incident. Now, there's no proof that the FBI was ever there. Their presence has never been confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
The toxicology report comes back and says that Mr. Cease died of cocaine overdose. From what the reports show, Mr. Cease had no previous report of any drug use. And when another fellow investigator of mine tried to get a police report, we were told the case was still open, even though we had a cause of death. Now,
how can that even be possible?
Yeah, exactly. From my experience, once an autopsy is completed and the cause of death is found, unless there be absolute mitigating circumstances, that case is closed.
Hey neighbors, the old way to meet for business is over the phone or in person. The new, better way is to meet clients and colleagues online with GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is like meeting in person, but less time-consuming and less expensive. Start your meeting with just a click. Everyone can see your computer desktop on their computer screen, so they can follow along as you move from page to page. You can use GoToMeeting to host a sales presentation, a product demo, or a training session. Even collaborate on documents by sharing your screens. Our listeners can try GoToMeeting free for 30 days. That's a month of unlimited online meetings free. For this special offer, you must visit www.gotomeeting.com/podcasts. That's gotomeeting.com/podcasts for a free trial.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We have Butch Witkowski. He's the chief investigator for MUFON, Pennsylvania. We're talking about what one might call the dark side, or the potential dark side, of UFO abductions. Okay, so about this autopsy here. Let's go on with this.
Well, what's not right is once an autopsy is completed and a cause of death is found, the case is usually closed, unless, like I said, unless there's mitigating circumstances, like there are other people involved, or you're waiting on other evidence from other decedents or something like that. But, when we tried to find out, a colleague of mine, actually, when he called the police and talked to them, and they told him that the case was still open, and it would not be closed at the present time, and if he kept bothering them, they would charge him with harassment if he continued to ask any questions. I found that really strange.
Now,
we're going to continue to try to get answers for the family. The whole thing is just, the guy goes up on top of a mountain to hunt deer, or spot deer, I'm sorry, and he disappears. His boot is found in a tree. His emaciated, nearly nude-clad body is found in the bushes that have been walked by who knows how many searchers and police and cadaver dogs and search dogs. And that was another thing. When in one of the reports I read, and I'm trying to get a hold of the guy that had the search dogs there, they had gotten clothing from the home and sent it to dogs, and the dogs never found any scent, even around his ATV. Now, the guy was on the ATV. It was his ATV. You would think there'd be a scent there. And the condition of the body was another thing. And at that time of year, and this body would have been missing for almost 40 hours, 36 hours at the minimum. It wasn't bloated. It was emaciated. It wasn't. There was no evidence of trauma. There was no livor mortis. There was no rigor mortis, where the blood pools at the bottom of the body while it's lying there. And another thing we were trying to confirm was they said that the body was taken to Fort Indiantown Gap, which is close by. It's an Army reservation. And for its first autopsy. Well, I'm familiar with that area. I'm familiar with the Gap. Some of my law enforcement training was taken up there, and they have no facilities for autopsy. I mean, best you could get up there would be a Band-Aid and some Mercurochrome.
But yet, this is where they say that they confirm that this is where the body was taken for autopsy?
But yeah, the first one. The second time was taken to a hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So we're trying to find out if this had one post, if this body was posted once or it was posted twice. And if it was posted twice, why was the first time it was posted at an Army reservation? Which has no facilities to do that, by the way.
Almost as if to say that there was something potentially might have happened to that body in a place not designed for autopsies to prep it for an actual autopsy.
Or hide something for a possible autopsy. Of course, that's the implication here.
Yeah, and that's possible. I mean, and both of those scenarios are possible. The only problem is, first of all, we're dealing with the police department who's not going to say anything because they say it's an open case. And the second thing is we're going to deal with the military, who they're not going to tell us anything because they're just not going to tell us. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason with the military, but you're not going to get that information.
All right. Now, meanwhile, looking at what Butch has just said, if we go to the New Fork database, we find, and Butch, please confirm this, that indeed there were UFO reports made that were called into New Fork that seemed to support what these witnesses said. Presumably these are the same witnesses that called up New Fork and reported seeing a disc-shaped craft with a light coming down, pulling something into it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's corroborating reports with New Fork, a completely independent organization from any of this, that there was indeed a disc seen in the same area at the time that theoretically he went missing, right?
That's correct. And New Fork really was the one that they jumped on that case from day one. And I would say to this date, their release of the report back then is probably the most comprehensive, and they kind of came up with the same stuff we are, where we have so many events of high strangeness taking place in this case, and there is no way to get any more information. The family, which we can all understand rightfully why they don't want to be involved anymore.
Well, yeah.
But they still got a hold of me. They still contacted me. When I gave a presentation, and it was a very small presentation on this case, at a conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, they had some people come to the conference to listen to it. And by the time it was over and I went to talk to them, because I really wanted to get their reactions, they left. They were gone. They disappeared.
Of course, a few things that are going to occur to some listeners. Might as well ask the question now. If you've seen like a TV show like Criminal Minds, you say, you know what? We've got this crazed serial killer out there who's doing weird stuff, and maybe the UFO or this high strangeness is all coincidental. So how do we assume this mysterious death is more than something that might have been done by some mad person?
I think the boot in the tree is the real clincher. How did that boot get up in the tree? Where's the other boot? Where's the other clothing? Why aren't there any marks around the ATV where he would have gotten off? Footprint, anything. There is no evidence found at that ATV other than his boot, and that's clinging up in a tree.
Condition of the body, Butch. Let's talk about the body, because I think that's where things really get interesting. Because you're saying here, you've studied other autopsies, you've studied homicides. This is part of what you've done professionally, right? So obviously there were things about the condition of this body that were unusual. Could you give us a rundown, a technical rundown of that?
The body should have been, for the time of year and the heat, the body should have been bloated. If you've ever seen a dead animal alongside the highway, you know, a raccoon all of a sudden is the size of a good-sized dog.
Yeah.
The bloating, the fluid loss, the pooling of blood in the lower parts of the extremities of the body, it was just not there. There are numerous reports that he was almost ashen white, emaciated, and then when you start looking at other reports, which we'll go into a little bit later on mutilations, I mean, he fits the same characterization as those reports. The body, they say, and this is, it's not quite hearsay, because even the one police officer said that the family was not allowed to see the body at the time of discovery. Of course, they've seen it later, but just like Gene said, you have a lot of time to doctor something up. That was very strange, that somebody from the family would have been called over to identify the body.
Right.
Although he was a member of the fire company, and they could have done that too. You know, somebody from the fire company said, "Yeah, that's Todd. I know him personally," and that would have been good enough.
But he had no clothes on, or just had a pair of underwear on, so his wallet presumably gone.
He was wearing camouflage clothing. He was wearing a vest, one of those like puffy vests, you know, nylon. Boots, socks, underwear, shirt, and the camouflage outfit. And I don't know if he had binoculars with him. I would assume somebody going to spot preseason deer.
Would have
when I did that, I had binoculars.
Yeah.
And none of that stuff was ever found, ever. The only thing that was ever found that belonged to him was what he was wearing, which was underwear, and one boot, which was found in a tree.
Now, if you look at the law enforcement authorities' reports, what do they say to the families? What's the official conclusion, if any?
The official conclusion was that he died of a cocaine overdose.
What did his wife? What did his wife say to that? Like, well, you mentioned something before, Butch. Supposedly, he had no history of drug abuse. I mean, if his wife is being told this, what's her reaction to that? Have you ever, by the way, spoken directly to his wife?
The wife will speak to no one. The individual that called me, whose last name was Cease, was a niece.
Okay.
And she denied outright any use of drugs, and she denied outright, of course, the fact that, you know, she didn't want her uncle to be listed as some alien abductee.
For obvious reasons. I mean, they've got to be traumatized enough by all this.
Yeah, and you know, when you looked into the guy's background, I mean, he was like... he was in the construction trades, and he was bidding on a job to do for the county, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. He doesn't fit that character of a drug user. Now, that has changed many times over the years, where you can have somebody that's a priest, a police officer, a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever, that are drug users. But usually in small towns, the drug users are well known by everybody. You know, they all know that this guy's a drug user, blah, 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 blah. But this guy had none of that background.
Also, when you're doing the autopsy and you're checking this out, you'd have some evidence of drug use, wouldn't you?
Sure. There would be damage to the inside of the nose. Was cocaine user. If it was an intravenous user, of course, you'd have vein collapse and stuff like that. But evidently, this guy had none of that. And I just don't buy the cocaine thing, only because what did he do with his clothes? Where was he for almost 36 to 40 hours? Why did his shoe wind up in a tree? Why aren't there any marks around the ATV where he got off, turned around, sat down, did anything?
Well, where did his blood go?
Yeah, there was no predator marks, anything like that. I mean, he wasn't attacked by anything. There was no fierce battle at the ATV for life and death. I mean, it's just too simple.
Butch, there's another question that comes up. Presumably, if somebody has been out in the brush dead for 40 hours, one would think that things would have started to tear into him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? And none of that was seen with this body, correct?
No, and the dead rattlesnake, that's another thing. I mean, the dead rattlesnake is like 3 feet away from the body. He has no bite marks on his body. There is no evidence of any rattlesnake bite mark on his body. Yet the snake is lying 3 feet away and almost in the exact condition he is. emaciated and just laying there.
Oh, boy. Ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to the show late at night. Fate magazine provides true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. To receive your free issue of Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit their website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
This is James Carrion, International Director of the Mutual UFO Network. You are listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney.
We have Butch Witkowski. He's a chief investigator from MUFON, Pennsylvania. We're talking about the strange, frightening case of Todd C's. It sounds almost like a cattle mutilation, except that it involves a human being.
Well, here's I guess this would be a silly question, Butch. Maybe it's an obvious one. I don't know. An autopsy is performed on a body. Presumably there is a detailed report, especially a case like this where there is some anomalous circumstances. One would think that there'd be interest in, how is it that a guy ends up out there for 40 hours, is not showing signs of rigor or livor mortis, is not bloated up. Presumably there was a full autopsy report drawn up. Does anybody have any access to that detailed report?
Not as long as that case is open, it's not.
So even the family, at that point, with this being their deceased family member, the family is not in a position to be able to ask for that report while there's an open case?
I think there would be some legal questions there. I would think that the family could retain a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that the only thing they're ever going to get would be the actual cause of death.
So this kind of, in your opinion, what would cause the police department to leave this case open? How do you explain their behavior with regards to this?
I can't. I really can't. I thought about it, talked to fellow police officers, a couple of retired guys, and we all kind of come up with the same thing. Look, if the case is done, if the post shows that the man died of a cocaine overdose, then that's what he died of. So that's the end of the story. Now, again, without those mitigating circumstances where you'd have, okay, there were other people involved, or we think he may have been murdered, or we think this, that, and the other thing, then they have reason to keep a case open. But there is no signs of that anywhere in the report. The New Fork report, which you mentioned and I said was probably the premier report done on this case, mentions nothing like that. And they tried to get the same information we did, and they came up with the same answers we got. Nada, zero, not talking.
So you kind of at a point then where you've got this situation where someone's trying to cover something up here. I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like, and especially in a situation where, as we said, you have these anomalous characteristics to the way the body was found. Now, just because, again, assuming that people don't know about anything about this case, they're hearing about it for the first time, what about the kinds of aspects that we hear about in the more compelling cattle mutilation cases? We hear about removal of body parts. We hear about the draining of blood. There was the issue of this kind of scar or mark on his forehead. Could you elaborate upon that, please?
Well, they say it was a dark-looking mark, like a bruise. It wasn't a hole like we find in some of the other mutilations or in the cattle mutilations. When you go back and you look at the whole abduction scenario, the abduction scenario is almost identical in every case. Every case. There may be one or two things missing from it, but when you look at the work with Dr. David Jacobs and those fellows back there, back in their time when they first started looking at this, I mean, he fits into nothing of that. In the 60s, when Dr. Leo Sprinkle really became interested in the abduction phenomenon, he was the only academic that was really studying and researching abduction accounts. And when he started putting things together, and then you had Bud Hopkins step in, and Dr. David Jacobson, Whitey Stryber, and Dr. John Mack, these are the people that started to put all this together. And when you look at their timelines and the areas of interest that the aliens seem to have on humans, Todd Cease fits into nothing in this category, nowhere. I mean, he's an outlier, and trying to get information on it is tough because that area of Pennsylvania is a very rural community, very tight community. So, how much or how little are people protecting the family? Why are the police saying what they're saying? The doctor that performed the autopsy says absolutely nothing other than the fact that he died of a cocaine overdose. But the fact remains, the high strangeness of the case is, where's his clothing? Just the simple things. Where's his clothing? How did the boot get up in the tree? Why is there no footprints around his ATV? He drove it up there. He had to get off of it. How did he get in the bushes that everybody was walking by for almost 2 days and nobody saw him until late in the afternoon?
So in a typical police investigation, wouldn't some of those strange aspects point towards something questionable, something like perhaps a murder? Is that why maybe the case is left opened, or do you think that there's a possibility that the case is left opened just to create a situation by where anybody trying to gather more specifics, like the autopsy report, like the specific toxicology report, because presumably with a cocaine overdose, we are not doctors on this show, we're not toxicologists, but I'm guessing that a cocaine overdose results, the actual cause of death would be the failure of certain organs.
Right.
You don't just get a great high and then die from the high. You get the high when, like a heart attack or something, right? I mean, you'd have some specific organ failure that would be the result of an excess of cocaine in the system, and presumably those things would be detailed on an autopsy report. So here's a question, Butch. I mean, how long can they keep a case open? Is it something that can be kept open perpetually?
Well, look at the yeah, pretty much so. Look at the Kecksburg case with the flying acorn that landed in Kecksburg. I mean, that thing has been open since the 60s, and it's just now, in the last 2 months, that the government steps forward and says, well, yes, something did come down in Kecksburg. After all those years of denial, yes, something did come down in Kecksburg, and it was part of a Russian satellite. So
yeah, our friend Leslie Kean has sort of hit a wall with that whole investigation.
So that case is basically done, because I've been to Kecksburg, I've talked to some of the witnesses a couple of years ago, and it's funny. Half the town believes it happened, the other half doesn't believe it. One brother says it happened, one brother says it didn't. One fireman says it did, and the other fireman said no, it didn't never happen. So you have this. In ufology, it seems like no matter what question you ask, or who you're asking it of, or what you're trying to find, it always leads to either nothing or 100 more questions. And the Cease case is the same way. But the simple things with the Cease case, which would, obviously answer a lot. How did his boot get up in the tree? What happened to his clothes? Just those two questions alone.
Right. Forget
everything else. How did the boot get up in the tree? Where's the rest of his clothes?
Here's a question about corroborating types of incidents. Does that area have any kind of a history of cattle mutilation episodes? Or a related question, what is the history of UFO sightings in that area that we know of?
Very little. There's very, very little sightings. No cattle mutilations that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But very little in the way of sightings. I think last year, when I just did our final map for 2009, I think there were 6 reports for the whole year.
All right, so pretty small as far as these things go. Yeah.
I think one of the things you also like to look at is repeatability. So we have this one case that stands by itself that appears to have anomalous aspects. But looking at the overall structure, are there other instances of humans found dead that may have had similar causes?
Not in the cocaine sense, but in the cattle mutilation sense, absolutely.
I think that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah, there are absolutely other cases. In the 50s, in the middle 50s, when cattle mutilation really started getting reported, I guess is the best way to put it, in areas of Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, that four-corner state area. First they blamed them on the pharmacologists that were taken, the companies were taking and using them for the excised organs for their research, and then it was the cults were blamed, using the organs for their research, for their rituals. And the problem with those scenarios was that, those carcasses were found in such remote areas. There was no physical traces of anybody being responsible for those deaths. There were no footprints, crushed grass, tire prints, imprints on snow-covered ground, no indications of man or predator near the carcasses. And an interesting fact is, with a cattle mutilation, and I believe it was Linda Moulton Howe did something on it a little while back, a couple of years ago, a predator will not go near one of those carcasses. Now, there's a free meal. And a wolf or a coyote will walk right past that carcass and never touch it. And if you've seen a picture of a cattle that's been taken down by a predator, they go for the soft tissue, the stomach area. They get into the stomach area, soft tissue, take what they want, and they leave. Not the case in cattle mutilations. Most cattle are found in relatively pristine shape, and then just, of course, the holes and different things are removed, different parts of the carcass, and it usually drain the blood. There's usually no trace of blood found around the body at all.
In that context, Butch, let's talk about then the John Lovett case. Sergeant Lovett, which is in this lore, has to be one of the most bizarre things I know I've ever read.
Yeah,
it's just incredibly weird. And when I was kind of asking before about the condition of C's body, you have a situation here where this guy Sergeant Lovett, his body, for the time that this happened. Let's. Why don't we step back and if you could please give our audience an idea for what the details of this case are, because it's a really weird one.
U.S. Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett in 1956 was reported to have been abducted while on a search for some missile parts on a recent range test in the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. He was in the company of his commanding officer who witnessed the abduction. Sergeant Lovett is on one side of a sand dune, and the commanding officer is on another side of the sand dune. And he hears Sergeant Lovett screaming, and he gets to the other side of the sand dune just to see the sergeant being pulled by what looks to be like a cable wrapped around his leg and being pulled up into a saucer-type vessel. The commanding officer, of course, radios back, and they come and get him. There's no sign of the sergeant, so the officer is actually placed under arrest as a potential murderer. A little strange there because...
Well, actually, this was a Major Cunningham?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so this is his commanding officer.
And he tried to save him. He tried to pull him away, but it just didn't work. All right. And then, the body's gone. They can see the drag marks where he was drug off, and 3 days later, the body's found really not far from the abduction point, and he's been terribly mutilated. The extent of mutilation reads like a horror story with this case. Along with his eyes, his tongue, lower part of his jaw, anus, genitalia, and a whole bunch of other tissue was removed. And the anus was cored out completely into the colon, which is exactly what they do to cattle.
Now, just to put something to rest here for a moment, Butch, there are people who will say, okay, we think that all cattle mutilations are the product of some kind of a satanic cult of some sort that are doing this to cattle, but you're describing basically the kinds of things done to a human that, correct me if I'm wrong, technologically at the time, is this the kind of thing that had ever been reported in the case of a murdered body?
I don't think technologically we could do some of this damage today. When you look at some of the photographs from the San Paulo case and other cases where, measurements were taken of the damage, the holes are 1.5 centimeter. Internal organs are sucked out through some type of instruments without damaging other organs. The same parts are taken all the time.
It seems awfully odd.
Sensory organs like the eyes, internal ears, tongues, the glands of the throat, lips, portions of the lower jaw, sexual organs, lower intestines. And it seems like when you look at some of the pictures really close up, even the cattle mutilations, it looks like it's a laser type of device. It's something that cauterizes the wound with an extreme heat as it's being used. And the holes are perfect. They're not misshapen. They're not jagged edged. It's like you take an apple core, and core an apple, And you have
So
a
presumably,
round
right,
score.
it's like a perfectly round. Well, but the thing is, presumably, if predators had hit a body, you'd
It's a rip
see
and tear.
nothing that uniform, right?
No, that's a rip and tear. I mean, if you would look at a picture of say a small calf that was attacked by a wolf, I mean, it's the middle of that animal is just shredded. I mean, just pulled apart, and you can see it was this ravaging rage of feeding frenzy that went on. With the mutes, you don't have that. You got clean holes and perfect cuts, and I mean, they can take the udders off of a cow in a perfect circle and not damage anything internally. There's a great picture on the internet of a cow where the udders were cut off, and you can see the stomach, and there's not even a mark on it. I'm not even a scratch. And all it did was cut through that skin, the thickness of that skin, with something very precise, never touched the stomach, made that circle and removed that organ, that udder organ, and never damaged anything else.
Oh, boy. Butch, we're going to break for a moment.
Sure.
We're talking to Butch Witkowski, Chief Investigator for MUFON, Pennsylvania. We're talking about the frightening scenario, human abductions, more on the other side of the Paracast. You hear it on TV, you hear it on radio, cash for gold. Yes, it's an enticing phrase during these challenging days, but the real question is, how much cash are you going to get for your gold and silver? Are you going to get the best value? Well, you can get the best price from a company whose owners have decades of experience in the business. Welcome to Goldbug. The folks at Goldbug warn you that many of those high-budget gold buyers are paying far less than you deserve for your gold and silver. Goldbug will give you top dollar each and every time. To learn more, call 1-866-596-6134. That number again, 1-866-596-6134 for Goldbug. Or visit us online at goldbug.com. That's Goldbug with 2 G's. Goldbug.com.
So, Frank, what do you think about UFOs?
I saw one once. I think they're out there. You know, what they are, I don't know. Well, I believe that something is out there. I think that those things that you see in the sky are only one small manifestation of a whole wide range of phenomena that people haven't properly named or have attributed the wrong source to.
Welcome back to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny.
We're back with Butch Witkowski. He's Chief Investigator for Pennsylvania MUFON. Butch, is there a specific site that you have for this branch of MUFON so people can check it out?
We have a website for Pennsylvania. It's www.pamufon.com. I really don't post too many cases on there. We do have a contact us page on the site where, you know, if somebody wants to talk about something or they have something to report other than going to MUFON, or they want a little bit of history on something, they can contact, put the information in there, and it comes right to my laptop, and I'll get back to them right away. We've got a lot of strange things come through that already, but surprisingly, from the area of the country up around Lake Todd, never got one word about him.
Nothing.
Not one question.
So, Butch, did you actually see photographic evidence in this Sergeant Lovett case? Have you actually analyzed or looked at any of these photographs?
No, there was. I don't know that there's even any evidence of that case, other than in the Majestic files. They say page 13, which is the only missing page of the Majestic files, was the story of Jonathan Lovett.
So, where's the information from this case come out of then? I mean, where is this case basically documented?
I really believe, some of these cases are so bizarre that you can't have all of this happening on a military base and somebody not saying something, as in Roswell. You can't take a whole base and say, look, if you guys ever talk about this again, you're all going to disappear, or something like that, or whatever they do. It's just not going to happen. There's always going to be one or two people that are going to come forward and start giving information. And I think a lot of it on the Lovett case was that type of information. It was just stuff that was let out, as in Roswell, and as the Bentwater case. I mean, look at that. For years, everybody joked about that was just a big lie. And then we have the English government this year coming out and saying, well, yeah, it did happen, so let's go on from there.
Well, I mean, we also had a number of witnesses in that case come forward. I mean, I just actually recently had the opportunity to meet Colonel Halt and speak with him at length privately about that case. So, first-hand witnesses, you never get better than that.
No,
right?
No, you don't. But you got to remember, how many years did Halt say it never happened?
Well, that's an interesting question. One that hopefully we'll get to ask him about when we have him on the show in the future.
Yeah, there were a lot of years when he denied that ever took place.
Yeah, well, people in the military, I guess, have reasons for wanting to maintain their careers without too many bumps or hiccups along the way.
Yeah, sure. But I think in these mutilation cases, I mean, if they have happened as they're reported, I mean, that... yeah, but they'd have to say everything then, wouldn't they, if they had to give everybody a warning?
Yeah.
In 89, Don Ecker, who was a director with Idaho MUFON, I believe at that time, had that report of the mutilated body reported near Bliss, Idaho.
Right.
And there's very little information about that.
In what Don has said on our show and said to us personally, he kind of got not so indirect feedback that he should back off.
Yeah, he said, when I read a little bit of his report, he says there was an absolute predisposition to repress the whole story by officials.
Yeah.
And then, there's really nothing more that can be found on it. Best case to date is the Sao Paulo case. I mean, that one went by the numbers. That one went by the books. The people that found the body, the investigators come in, the forensics team comes in,
Let's step back and let's lay that, if you would, again, assuming that listeners don't know about that case. Give us the 101, please.
Okay, it comes out of Sao Paulo, Brazil in 88. Some fishermen are out on the Guaraparanga Dam, which is just a man-made lake that supplies water to Sao Paulo. They spot on the shoreline what they believe to be a body. They go to the police department, make a report. The police and forensic team arrive to find the butchered remains of a man. The decedent is found with the following surgically removed: his eyes, left ear, inner ear, lower jaw, inner throat and tongue. There are 1 inch to 1.5 inch holes in the following areas where muscle tissue and glands were removed: shoulder, navel, chest, thigh. Testicles were removed, and the prostrate gland was removed through the urethral tube, which is quite unusual. Usually everything's just cut away. The intestines were removed completely via a hole in the navel, and the anus was cored out, again, to the colon. The body showed no signs of rigor mortis or liver mortis and was unremarkable in any sign of bloating, given the high heat temps of the area, and the time of death was placed at between 30 and 42 hours prior to discovery. No blood or any noticeable amount of any type was found in or on or around the body. The body was emaciated, showed only slight discolorations around its wounds, and one of the most disturbing facts that I read in the official autopsy report, which I do have, was 2 words: vital reaction. And that shows up in the autopsy report, I believe, 7 or 8 times. Let me give you the definition of vital reaction. Vital reaction is a term indicating a response of a living body tissue to injury. By definition, it can only occur during life, and therefore an index of antemortem injury. This is of considerable importance in forensic medicine in A, attempting to establish that the injury is inflicted before death, and B, the possibility of estimating time of infliction before death. So what that means is that this guy was alive when this happened.
Pretty horrible thought. Mm-hmm. It's a horrifying. It's a downright horrifying thing. Corroborating UFO sightings in the area during this time period?
There were a lot in the area. Again, where this guy was found, if you look at an overhead shot, a Google shot, it's like an island in the middle of this lake, and there's a couple smaller islands, and covered by trees, and it sits a little high in the country, like it's built up from the ground mass. So for anybody to get a clear shot of anything in the distance, the first thing they're going to run into is this group of trees, huge trees. Mm-hmm. So really there was no report of any sighting in that area at the time of this death.
Now there's and I don't have it in front of me, but there's a book from a now deceased author about what had been going on in Brazil with these cases of violent UFO interactions.
Yes, many.
There are quite a number of them. And it's kind of interesting how when you look into this, you find that there are certain types of concentrations of activity in certain geographical regions. Separate even from the whole issue of UFO flaps that occur in specific areas. You start to look into the activity in the last couple of years in Argentina. It's interesting how in 2009 there were people who said that, well, UFO activity was down, anomalous activity was down in 2009 compared to previous years. And I think to myself, well, have they completely ignored South America and especially Argentina, where, interestingly enough, in Argentina, there had been a number of mutilation cases in recent years.
That's correct.
Yeah, so you end up seeing these kinds of concentrations of certain types of activity, and not just UFO activity, but in terms of paranormal stuff. There's, in certain parts of Brazil, you just seem to have concentrations of this. And of course, you always have this idea that, well, perhaps there's something in terms of the culture of the region, in terms of levels of education, that would facilitate certain types of mythologies coming up. But when we talk about these violent UFO interactions in Brazil, we're talking about relatively contemporary stuff, not stuff that happened 15, 60 years ago. But stuff that's happened much more recently, where there are things like photographic evidence, and a pretty decent amount of it. Now, you're saying that you had seen pictures of this body that was found in the São Paulo case?
They are available on the internet. If anybody just Googling human mutilation, those pictures will come up.
All right, so here's a question for you, Butch. All right, you get pictures on the internet, but how do you then tie those pictures to the case? Is there any way to corroborate the veracity of the sourcing of those photos?
An American reporter was contacted by one of the physicians that conducted the autopsy and why, how, or whatever, he gave her a copy of it, and it describes the crime scene. Now it's in Portuguese, but it describes the crime scene. It describes the body just as it lays there, as the pictures show it. It describes the holes in the body, the missing body parts. Everything is in there, and it's the report that also shows the use of the words vital reaction. The individual, and I just can't remember her name for the life of me right now, made it public, put it on a website, and along with the pictures, and it's something to read. I had it translated, and when you see vital reaction, and vital reaction is pretty simple in terms. If you would take a knife and stab a dead person, the only thing you're going to get is a hole, the knife that the knife made. You take the same knife and you stab a live person, of course they flinch, they twist, they move, they try to get away, and there's ripping and tearing and distortion of the edges and black and blue and bleeding, and these bodies don't have that. They just don't have it. And there have been reports of cattle that have been found where the eyes are removed, and this one really disturbs me. It was a horse, and I don't remember where it was. I believe it was Colorado. The researchers or the investigators are on the scene. They're looking at the horse, and they're taking photographs, and the guy says, wait a minute. He said, if the horse was on its side and the eye was cut out and removed like it was, the viscous fluid from behind the eye would have ran down the side of the animal's face.
Okay.
This horse had the viscous fluid run down its snout and over the front of its mouth. So the horse had to be standing up for that to happen. So are these people and animals being hypnotized, paralyzed while this takes place? Don't know.
To the extent where they're not having the kind of reaction you would expect them to have.
Exactly.
To pull away, to basically create those kinds of distortions in the incisions you would expect to see from somebody or a creature that was under trauma that was trying to escape.
Exactly. Yeah. If somebody comes at you with some kind of machine or something like that and they start removing body parts, you'd think somebody tried to, really take off really quick. But some of there were laboratory reports that came out in 1978, in March of 78, and they were tested too, and I believe Gabriel was on the History Channel one time or two times. Gabriel Valdez was a New Mexico highway patrolman. He's retired now, but he'd been in charge of a couple of these mutilation cases, cattle mutilation cases. Mm-hmm. They turned over a lot of the anomalies to like the Los Alamos Scientific Lab, which is part of the University of California, for microscopic and bacteriological studies. And one of the things that was almost dominant in every cattle mutilation was that the liver and the heart were white and they were mushy. The organs had the texture and the consistency of peanut butter. But yet in all the reports that came back, the only thing that the University of California and Los Alamos were saying was there was a naturally occurring bacteria called Clostridium in the heart. But now, if they found that, why didn't they directly investigate that heart's unusual color or texture? I mean, a person can be dead a long time, and when you take the heart out, it still, resembles the heart, meaty, red, pink, grayish in color. But these had the consistency of peanut butter, and they were white and very mushy.
Physiologically, well, what would cause that kind of? And again, Gene and I are not biologists, nor are we doctors. But what would cause that kind of texture to occur in that kind of tissue, based on what we know scientifically? What would create that reality?
What they did find was that especially the liver, contained 4 times the normal level of zinc, potassium, and phosphorus. 4 times the level. There's no way an animal would get 4 times that level. The blood samples that were taken at the scene, what little could be found, were actually a very light pink in color, and it did not clot after several days. You cut your finger, and in a few minutes it'll clot up if you don't have.
Unless you're a hemophiliac, yeah.
Yeah, it'll clot up in a couple minutes. But this blood was light pink in color and did not clot for after several days. And the animals found, a lot of the animal hides found were unusually brittle for a fresh death. One animal had been estimated, I think it was only 5 hours dead, and the flesh underneath was found to be discolored, yet there was no damage to the hide, and the hide was as brittle as if it had been baked. So are they killing these animals by blowing apart the red blood cells with some kind of burst of radiation? Who knows? But the laboratory did confirm there's a presence of anticoagulants in the samples taken from other cows mutilated in the same region.
Hi, this is Tamar from Namecheap. We're a domain name and web hosting company, and we really care about our customers. With domain name purchases, Namecheap offers free SSL and free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers. We won't bother you with unwanted messaging in your inbox or upon checkout, but most importantly, we care about you, our customers. Your satisfaction and happiness is our primary focus because your support means so much to us. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at radio.namecheap.com for web hosting and domain name specials. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Namecheap, where we host many great contests, or become a fan of ours on Facebook at facebook.com/Namecheap. See you online.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We have Butch Witkowski, Chief Investigator from MUFON, Pennsylvania, and we're looking into not just human mutilations, but animal mutilations. David?
Were we talking about an artificial introduction of anticoagulants?
That's what they're saying.
All right. So and again, let's follow that train of thought for a moment, Butch. If that were the case, what would be the reason for introducing anticoagulants into the body of a creature? Would this somehow facilitate the removal of blood
one of the theories, and one of the facts is that cow blood and human blood is not that far apart, DNA-wise. So in a catastrophe, or you'd have a massive amount of injuries to a large group of people, you could use cow's blood, almost like during the wars when they used different chemicals instead of actual whole blood to just keep somebody alive till they got them to an aid station.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked that up, although there's not a whole lot written about it, the 3 or 4 articles that I did read, cow blood can be substituted for human blood, not forever, but for a short period of time, which would get a person enough time to get them to a hospital where they could have a transfusion of whole blood. Why are they taking blood? Why the tissue? And why the same tissue? You know, we're not talking about finding bodies or cattle with a leg missing or the head missing or, you know, a hind rump. You know, it's the same parts. The eyes, the nose, you know, the tongue, jawbone, lips, ears, inner ears, glands of the throat, the sexual organs. Almost in every case, even the cases of human mutilation, the sexual organs are taken.
Well, that seems to be the whole interest in reproductive abilities. Certainly, that's a recurring theme in so much of the abduction material. The stuff that's compelling, right? Because there's lots of abduction material. Some of it's more compelling than others, but in the stuff that's compelling, right?
The use of those body parts for the human hybrid. So,
which takes a lot of people to a place they don't want to go with this material. It's an uncomfortable place, right? I mean, that's sort of the bottom line. And this is where, certainly in the realm of ufological research, you run into that line that people draw in the sand, where if you are the kind of person who believes that abductions are real, then you're basically accepting into the malevolence model, and that runs counter to the benevolence model of the Space Brothers here to help us evolve. And this, by the way, I mean, there is always a possibility that what we're dealing with here is more than one sourcing of things, and that, potentially, I'm not saying we believe this, but, you could potentially have a situation where both those things are occurring simultaneously and exclusively of one another. That's a whole nother story, but certainly in terms of people coming forward with stories of malevolent abductions, physical proof in the cases of mutilation, where you have now physical evidence of what appears to death. I mean, if you've got a creature that's dead and has body parts removed, certainly any reasonable person would probably not put that under the category of a benevolent interaction. So when you have stuff like that, and you're someone, Butch, who's been openly investigating this, have you run into the same kinds of feedback that Don Ecker tells us he's run into, where you've had people or entities as in, somebody tell you, hey, you shouldn't be looking under this stone?
Yeah, but the thing, my answer to that is, look, anybody can look under this stone. It's all over the internet. I'm just trying to get it a little further.
Right.
When you talk about the human mutilations and the cattle mutilations, and then you look at the areas of interest that the aliens or whoever they are appear to have when people are abducted and they're brought back and they're talked to by guys like Dr. Jacobs and desensitized and interrogated. When you look at those areas, the areas that the aliens appear to have the most interest in is almost like a mutilation without the mutilation. It's the cranium, the nervous system, the skin, the reproductive system, the cardiovascular systems, respiratory systems, lymphatic systems, the lower regions of the abdomen, but they ignore the upper region of the abdomen. So these are people that come back and say, well, this is what they tested me on, or this is what they did to me. And then you take that with that one step or two steps where now you've got a mutilated body laying here, and what was disturbed on the body, the cranium, the nervous system, the skin, the reproductive system, cardiovascular, respiratory, lymphatic, the same thing. Only this time, instead of returning the person, that stuff is removed and the person is just lying there.
Well, so this begs a question, Butch, and given that you've been someone who's investigated homicides before, let me pose this question to you. If there were beings that were taking humans and cattle and removing these organs, why would they then take what was left of the body? Why would they then return the remains instead of destroying them? And I'm not saying that you know what motivates these things, but from just a logical point of view, wouldn't it make more sense to get rid of what was left?
I've had that question asked to me, I will say at least 100 times, and I have no answer for that.
No.
My theory, if I was doing that, I would get rid of the evidence. I would not, drop the bodies. These bodies are basically in plain sight. In 1994, there was a case came out of New Zealand. I'm trying to get a hold of the investigator out there. Had all the markings and all the evidence of the San Paulo case, and terribly mutilated, just like Sergeant Lovett. And then there was in 2005, you had the Beni Mazar region outside of Cairo, Egypt. 3 families were found done in like this. Every man, woman, and child was butchered in the exact same manner. And the police blamed it on a mentally retarded guy who lived in the area.
Where was that case? Come again on that last one you just mentioned?
It was in 2005. It was in the Beni Mazar region outside of Cairo, Egypt, kind of like the outskirts of the town, outskirts of the city. 3 families were found mutilated, and in the exact same fashion as every mute that we found. Every man, woman, and child was butchered in the same manner. Even the animals inside the house, which were like cats, dogs, The local police, they just blamed it on some mentally retarded guy in the area, and the case was never pursued to find the real perpetrators. You have these 2 cases now that are coming out of the Vietnam era, and there's very little on them, but if it's a made-up story, when you look at the other stuff, these 2 stories are very possible. The first one takes place during the Vietnam War, and it involves a MAXOG group on a mission, and they encounter a group of aliens picking up body parts from a firefight and placing them in containers. Another firefight, of course, ensues, and no one really says what happens other than the MAXOG unit is debriefed using sodium pentothal, and their memories are erased with a chemical cocktail. And now the chemical cocktail's wearing off, and these guys are starting to put 2 and 2 together and, coming forth with these stories. But I'm sure they'll be kept quiet. The second case involved a combat photographer from the Navy who was dispatched to the scene of a B-52 crash in the jungle. He gets to the scene with the rescue team, only to find a B-52 sitting in the jungle with very little evidence of a crash, if any. Looks like it was just laid there, taken out of the sky and set on the ground. They enter the bomber to see what happened to the crew, and the 5 members of the crew are still strapped in their seats, and they've been mutilated just like every other mute. And the order is given to destroy the plane, and the occupants inside and the rescue team members all had their memories erased. And just recently, those memories have started to return. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about those cases.
Oh, Jesus. All right.
Well, if we think that UFOs are here to help us, boy.
Ray Perkins, a reclusive veteran burned out from the Gulf War, lives tortured by relentless, perplexing nightmares. Nightmares of a horrific battle in deep space and of a mysterious woman suffering in agony for her devastated world. A woman not yet born, calling across centuries to him. Then, a coincidence leads him to his destiny, his chance to alter the universe. Attack of the Rockoids. The former fiction editor for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Robert Simpson, writes, "The soul of the novel Attack of the Rockoids lies in its heart and passion for building a convincing tale of a love that spans the galaxy. A thrilling story. Attack of the Rockoids is available now. Read a sample chapter and get a special discount off of the cover price at our website, rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com. Attack of the Rockoids, a novel in the grand science fiction tradition."
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned into the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. Hey, let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
We have Butch Witkowski, Chief Investigator for MUFON Pennsylvania. We have a link to the organization's site at theparacast.com. We've been exploring the dark side of not just UFO abductions, but animal mutilations, all sorts of really odd and frightening things that indicate that the world of the paranormal is not a very nice place to explore. Well,
we sort of knew that on lots of levels anyway.
We've been trying to say that, and our listeners don't listen, but maybe they will now.
No, they listen.
So, since you're a verb, David, could you possibly continue?
Cut it out. Yeah. So here's the thing, Butch. Getting back to my question before to you. So these things are not, whatever's going on, they're not getting rid of the evidence. They're basically putting it right back down in plain sight, which to me suggests, and I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are about this. To me, it suggests one of two things. Either A, they don't care whether we find the evidence or not. They could care less because they feel that there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Or B, that they want us to see this. They want us to see this so that we understand that we're not in control of this situation. What do you think about that statement?
I agree more with A.
They just don't care.
I think they just don't care. And if we would come upon them, what are we going to do about it? It takes you then to another realm where you have the different groups that will say, well, there are so many different groups, I think 57 varieties right now, of aliens, and you have this group really likes us, and this group could care less, and this group would rather eat us, and this group, would rather enslave us, but this group is going to protect us. So, and that's all man-made. We know nothing of fact in any of those statements. Are they just waiting around till somebody lights the fuse and just blows it all up, or is somebody trying to figure out a way to extend life through removing organs from animals and humans and trying to say, they have a real problem with cancer, but we know how we can fix this, and if we inject this into the genetic system, blah blah blah. It's mind-boggling. It's just, you can take it in so many directions. And, of course, there's some people out there taking it so far, it's just crazy. I think if we stay on track and we just remain looking at the facts, I think putting enough facts together is going to give us some sort of scenario of why it's happening or who's doing it. I mean, there's been people that have stepped up and said, hey, this is the government doing this stuff. I mean, they're out there, because certain cattle have been found to have been dropped from great heights. And all the bones are crushed and all that stuff. And they said, well, of course, it's a black helicopter. Well, yeah, it could be a black helicopter. They've had animals found in trees. They've had there's reports right now that I'm working on with a lady in England who has really gone back. And, I mean, she's gone back into the 17th century where they're reporting bodies found in trees that were missing for only 2 or 3 days but were completely mummified. And some of her stuff is just, I mean, it's so intriguing that, I could spend hours and hours and hours reading her emails.
Well, and, that actually, you just said something interesting, because I wanted you to clarify on terminology you were using before, like in the Todd Steves case where you said emaciated. By that, do we mean basically almost like desiccated, like where you've had extreme removal of moisture?
Yes. Yeah, that would be emaciated. Now, the bodies that she's documenting over in England, and this was all over the country. It wasn't just in like London. I mean, this was all over the country back in the 17th and 18th centuries. Bodies were only missing for a day or 2 or 3, and they would find them hanging in a tree, just like they were dumped there. Somebody picked them up, did whatever they did, dropped them in the tree, and they were totally mummified. And the process that she relates to is, she's relating the bodies that are found to that of the Egyptian mummies. Now, I don't know what you know about Egyptian mummies, but the little bit I ever read about them, it took months and months and months to get a body into that state.
Yeah.
And these were people that were only gone for 2 or 3 days, and they were completely mummified, inside and out, but no animals.
Well, and that's, in talking about mutilations and this whole thing about the similarity between, let's say, some aspects of cow blood compared to human blood, one almost then expects there to be a good number of mutilated pigs found. If we're talking about things that are genetically close to humans, and I'm certainly among the things that I'm not would be a geneticist, But it's my understanding that
David, are you genetically close to humans? I wanted to ask that.
I have. I resemble that remark. But you would almost expect there to be a good number of mutilated pigs found. If what you had, aware of. Well, that's kind of an interesting quirk. I mean, that to me, that's always really stood out.
I think what would be a way to go there to find out would be what would the pig's blood be compared to in human blood? Would there be an absolute use there? I mean, they use pig valves, pig heart valves, and certain parts of pigs to replace organs that are dying out in a human.
Exactly. So one would think that at the blood level, there'd be a good level of compatibility. If you're taking certain body parts out of a pig, then, certainly those body parts work within the medium of blood. And damned if I know. I mean, I certainly don't know this. But it's very odd. And I think the other thing that people then come up with, and there are clues. I mean, we don't have any answers in any of this, right? But there are these little clues that show up. And one of the things that's always struck me about this topic is that we know that we've had some success technologically trying to recreate aspects of, for example, blood, artificial plasmas, and so forth. People, I think, will stop and look at all of this and say, well, if you had an technologically advanced being, why would they need to come and basically take blood? Isn't blood something that they could effectively manufacture? Which I think is an interesting question. Of course, seems to me like whenever you're doing any kind of, for example, cloning, you have your original source, and then you have clones and clones of clones, and the closer you get to the source, the purer the material is. And it's always occurred to me that in the case of what we're talking about with this, that, maybe a technologically advanced civilization. And, here's the thing, Butch, on the Paracast, we don't even necessarily say alien as an extraterrestrial. We kind of tend to stick with the non-human. Because truth is, and you said it before, straight out, we don't know what we're dealing with here. The 57 species of creatures visiting the Earth, that actually is a piece that, from what I can tell, is sourced with Clifford Stone, and there's nothing.
She took that from the Heinz ads, 57 varieties.
Of tomato.
Sure.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, of pickle. That's what the Heinz
pickle.
And also ketchup. And,
Well,
I don't know.
You have some of the folks out there in the ufology crowd that I see ufology has changed a whole lot in the time that I've been. Like I said, I did it independently by myself for a long time, and I was getting nowhere. I mean, I didn't have the contacts. I didn't, I couldn't call Peter Robbins on the phone and say, "Hey, Pete, what's happening?" I can do that now. So I can bounce ideas off of other ufologists, and they can bounce ideas off of me, or I can give them what I got, and they can give me a little bit of what they got, and we try to come up with an answer. But ufology has changed. It was at one time, I think, the ufologist, or the norm for ufologists, was the guy that stood outside in freezing weather looking at a clear sky with binoculars and a camera. And any movement in the sky was a UFO. That has changed. A lot of your investigators now are doctors, lawyers, ex-law enforcement, firefighters. I mean, people that have been involved in unusual and usual backgrounds. In my group of investigators, of which we have, I believe, 33 now in Pennsylvania, field investigators, I have like 3 private detectives, 4 fraud investigators, 3 ex-law enforcement, military. So, it's not like somebody walks in with a picture and we look at it and go, wow, that's really quite a picture you got there. One of the guys will take it home and they'll just pick it apart and say, well, it's not what you think it is. It's somebody just shining a flashlight from the ground up or a laser beam. The investigators today want to know. We're not buying you walk in with the picture and we go like, wow, great, really great looking UFO. We want to know what it is. How did you get it? What did you use to get it? What type of program did you wash it through? We had a case where a guy sent me an email and he said he had this rock that he found in his yard, his field, a farmer's field, his field, a number of years ago, and he had sent it to all over the place. Los Alamos had it for a while, And everybody's saying they don't know what it is, they don't know what it is. So this guy's walking around thinking, he's holding, part of Mars or something. And one of our investigators is also a geologist for the state of Pennsylvania, certified geologist. So we gave it to him, and he took it to the University of Pennsylvania, the lab, geologist lab, and they took it apart, and, little pieces here, and did spectrograms and all that stuff on it. And it comes back that, yes, it's unusual in the fact that there's some coal there's some iron, there's some phosphorus and marble-like material. But they got it to the point where they narrowed it down and said this is only found in the strata down near Philadelphia along the river, in a very small area. And he said how it got up here in this guy's field in Lancaster County is just, who knows? How did it get there? Could have came in with a load of trash. Somebody could have got a load of topsoil and it just happened to be there. Or somebody just picked it up one day and said, hey, it's a neat-looking rock, but then they didn't want it and threw it away. The ufologist today is smarter. They're using more technology. We have infrared cameras. We have infrared devices to look at things. And the Bigfoot people that are looking for Bigfoot, they've gone scientific. They're out there with infrared and different types of listening devices and cameras that they hide in the woods and take your picture when something walks by. But when it comes to abduction, you're dealing with strictly a human element, and where the individual you're talking to and asking the questions to is just giving you what they think happened, or what they think took place. They can't say it for sure. Implants, I've seen a couple demonstrations with those, and Dr. Lear, and at the X conference last year, and he had one that he broke apart when he took it out, and 2 days later when he retrieved it, or 3 days later when he retrieved it from the cabinet that it was locked up in, it grew back together. I don't know. It's a different world.
Well, then, obviously when you're talking about the current situation, you have this thing called the Internet that gives everybody a platform, which is a both good and bad thing. You basically have, in many cases, and this is something we're going to actually look into, is that on the Internet, nobody knows you're a dog. If you're doing things on the Internet, you can actually use technology in a way to create a completely fabricated reality that is recursive and self-contained and self-perpetuating. So, when we talk about, it's interesting to hear how people will talk about, for example, digital photography. It's not as good as film. And the answer is no, that's just silly. Please, the best digital cameras now are giving us something that was very close to the equivalent of the actual useful resolution of a 35 millimeter film frame, the big difference being that we don't have film grain anymore, which is actually, in many cases, if you're trying to analyze something, the film grain gets in the way. Where nowadays, if you've got a decent digital camera and you're shooting in raw file format, there are certain types of attributes of the different CCD mechanisms that will give certain vendors' cameras certain types of quote-unquote digital noise that is it's a product of the actual CCD sensor in the camera. But we don't have, and you can actually use that in many cases to get a handle if you don't have metadata available to you that's taken in the digital photograph. You can actually start to recognize some of the characteristics of some of the different CCDs in the different cameras. It's not quite the same as film grain, but the bottom line is that, if you're talking about ufology today, certainly we have to differentiate between the availability of technology on one side versus people's willingness to use technology, communications technology like the Internet, to fabricate things, being now easier than ever, really. And and then, of course, add on top of all of this, and we haven't even brought up the whole issue to you. You said you were at the X conference. Gee, what do you think of the disclosure movement? Which is a whole other can of worms.
For 58 years, Fate has provided true reports of the strange and unknown. Fate brings you the latest in all aspects of the paranormal, like angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, and much, much more. To receive your complimentary Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit their website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
This is the Paracast with your hosts, Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. You never know what's going to happen next.
Butch Witkowski, he is chief investigator for the Pennsylvania branch of MUFON. We have a link to the site over at theparacast.com in case you are a resident of Pennsylvania and you want to report a sighting. They have quite a few investigators. Now we're trying to look at the meta picture after we explored the human abductions, the human mutilations, animal mutilations, and now look at where all this means and where it's going. So, all right, disclosure, my friend. What do you think, Butch?
I'm pretty cut and dry with that, and I made that known at the X conference when I was talking to a couple of people down there. I really don't think that it's going to be one of us guys that makes the disclosure. I don't think it's going to be anybody from the government. I think it's going to be some guy that's like sitting out on his front porch and, something lands and the guy gets out and says, "Hey, I'm here. How you doing? Come on in and have a beer," and calls a newspaper.
It's not going to be like handing them some pancakes.
Right. I think it's going to be very cut and dry. I don't think the government will ever come forth with this disclosure because, first of all, the levels of secrecy in the government, far surpass the president. There's stuff that goes on and happens that he's not even privy to and never would be.
Do you think, since you raised that point, do you think this is something that's often suggested? Before the president becomes the president, you have people from NSA, people from top secret agencies. They go to the president, they sit him down and said, okay, now that you're going to be president, you need to learn how things really are. And suddenly what they said during the campaign and how they govern changes as a result. Is the UFO mystery part of it?
Oh, I'm sure it is. The only thing that comes to mind when I think of the government and ufology is like, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. When I was at the conference last year, a lot of people thought that, with Obama being inaugurated, that he would be very forthcoming and this and the other thing with all the stuff in ufology. But, ufology's past isn't as shining as people think it is. People say, but we had people on the moon in the late 30s. The Nazis had saucers.
Yes.
There's bases on the dark side and the moon, and there's these civilizations that have been found, and they've landed in the United States. They met with presidents, and they've blah, 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 and it goes on and on and on.
They took Eisenhower to that
the famous Eisenhower
base.
Meeting. And there was a guy there that was actually there that day, and, he swore and declared what he saw is what he saw. He said one saucer landed, one saucer stayed above it, almost like in a protective mode. A ramp came down. The president and a couple officers walked into it. They were in for a little while. They came back out, and they took off, and he left, and the whole base was closed down. And everybody was told not to look toward a certain area of the base. Did it happen? In my opinion, I think it's a bunch of hogwash. Somebody would have had their brownie out. You just know.
Yeah, you don't look there. Okay, I won't look there. Of course I won't.
Exactly.
It's like, come on.
And
human
the thing is, like
nature.
you're saying about technology, every person walking around in this country today is loaded with technology. That cell phone, that PDA they got on their hip, it does everything. It can get access to the internet. It can take photographs, decent photographs, some of them. And with the technology, and we've disrobed a couple hoaxers where we've got a picture of this, that, and the other thing, and we're looking at it, and I'm going like, geez, that's not really what it looks like. And then you kind of turn it upside down, or you flip it this way or that way, and you change a couple things here and there, and you're looking at an airplane or a helicopter or somebody's boat in their backyard, or Christmas tree lights strung in the trees. You were saying about the film cameras. The film cameras were pretty easily to debunk because, when they messed with the negative, they left a lot of traces. And people think that with the digital age, that all went away. To the contrary, I think it made it a lot easier for us. I mean, you can look at a photograph and blow it up, and you see that pixel distortion where that 747 now has no tail, it has no wings, it has no engines. It's just this long cigar-shaped tube, and that's the saucer. And, the distortion is so easy to find. Disclosure, they showed pictures of some stuff at the conference. And I've seen some of those pictures on the net, and I'm thinking, buddy, if you're believing that this thing is for real, you should not go to a conference like this. Because I think there's a lot of people that attend that conference, and it was only my first time there, that are very knowledgeable of what they're doing and what they're looking at. And there's a fellow I was talking to in the hall that was telling me exactly how a flying saucer works. And he said, I'm right on the money. And I said, well, what's your background in it? Are you a pilot, or, do you have some kind of degree in metallurgy or engines or nuclear physicist or what? He says, no. He said, I work at the coal company down in certain part of town there. And I'm like, well, boy. But
maybe it's the black lung that did it.
He wrote it. Well, yeah, but that's the other thing. They write a book, and all of a sudden they got all the answers. And I kind of stuck with my investigations, reading the people that I truly believe know what they're talking about. I've seen some investigators that you can read. You're reading their book, and you just know that they're fed up. They've had enough. They're tired of the lies. They want to quit. They want to do this, and all I can say to those guys is just hang in there. I mean, there's enough guys coming up through the ranks now that are smart. I mean, they're street smart. They've done investigations the hard way. They've used the technology that we're just now starting to use. The technology is very expensive. When you look at a FLIR camera or any FLIR device, you're looking at $6,000 to $8,000. And years ago, it was the magnifying glass and the cheap binoculars from your local sporting goods store and the Brownie. A good camera. I carry Nikon. I carry 5 Nikons and 3 Sony Digitals. And, I have them all set up differently. Some are infrared, some are black and white, some are color. But not everybody can do that. So in Pennsylvania, we go a little above and beyond what MUFON requires as we have training sessions for our FIs. Our field investigators are trained. We have ex-law enforcement, fire officials, private detectives. Everybody's in our group gets a shot at training. And we get our people together. Matter of fact, we're going to have one on the 16th of January. There'll be 3 sessions going on across Pennsylvania, and all our investigators will be there. We go through the training tapes that MUFON supplies us, and then we go through our stuff.
Talking about UFO investigations, by the way, I am a card-carrying member of MUFON. Just want to mention that. Okay.
Did you take the test?
If I took the test, I'd fail miserably. I'll tell you that right now. I might try, but I've had experience as a reporter. There is some kind.
It's fair, but it's not that.
I'll try it. Okay. Then of course David could laugh at me. Oh, he failed. Ha ha ha. And then I'll have David take the test.
I'd never do that. I'm not a good test taker, actually.
Okay,
Sorry.
you see, you've talked your way out of it.
Well, but Butch is describing a MUFON that I'd be happy to be involved with, unlike the MUFON meetings that happen in the New York area that are run by a person whose business card reads Angelic Healer, and where they begin their little monthly meeting with a prayer to the Space Brothers to help us.
Well, here in Arizona, they have a few things like that. But let's talk about MUFON seriously. One thing you mentioned as a topic of discussion, Butch, was the so-called misinformation war being waged against MUFON. What are we talking about here?
It seems a few weeks ago, and it goes back a little longer than that, but I think it really came to a head a few weeks ago, where stuff was being put on the internet that, that we were a government organization and we were suppressing evidence and we were all government employees. We were the men in black. Listen, I own one black suit. It's pinstriped. I'm sorry. I'm not a fashion freak. So if I need to get a black suit, and I'm kind of a little upset that I'm not getting any residuals from the movies, but we were accused of a lot of things. And I really kind of took it to heart, and I sent an email out to all our investigators and our members where I said, look, the only people that are doing this are the hoaxers that we've caught. And not just us, but the various MUFON branches all over the country. When you look back, there seems to be like this group of ne'er-do-wells who are the typical stereotype wannabes. They want to be the guy that saw the UFO. They want to be the investigator, or they start their own little group, which begins with a 5-pointed star and somebody throwing darts at it or something, whatever they're doing, and they take on MUFON because they have to take on MUFON. MUFON is the oldest, most well-respected investigative group in the country. So we're the biggest, so we're going to take the heat. They're going to come after us. And a lot of my guys took it to heart and said, "Look, wait a minute, it's an all-volunteer organization. These people don't get paid, to go out and do these investigations. They're using their own gas, their own time, their own film, cameras, their own equipment. So when somebody starts accusing us of being part of the government, I really take the issue with that. I don't report to anybody. I get an investigation, and, the confidentiality that MUFON uses with investigations is surpassed by nobody. They're a world-class organization. Jim Carrion has done a great deal for the organization since he's come into it, and he's had his accusations leveled at him because he happened to be in the military and he had to be a logistics officer. All of a sudden, he was a man in black, and he was feeding or hiding all the good cases. You can go into MUFON and the CMS, our case management system, and you can look up every report that was ever given to us. I mean, it's there in black and white. There's nothing suppressed. Newfort, he goes back into the 40s, 47, 48, I believe, in Pennsylvania alone, and he goes far past that. It's a sad thing. We're actually the ones out there trying to get these folks an answer, and in doing that, I guess we're not coming up with the answer fast enough, and we're not coming up with the answer they want to hear. So therefore, let's make war on MUFON. And when we really looked into some of the people that were doing it, they were hoaxers that were caught.
Is it something where the people who are part of the problem are trying to divert attention from what they did?
Oh, yeah, sure. They tried their 5 minutes of fame in front of their friends and family, and we shot them down. Now the retaliation comes in the form of, well, MUFON's hiding this, and MUFON's men in black, and MUFON's government agents, and MUFON's this, and MUFON. MUFON takes all your information and then gives it to government agencies so they can send the IRS out to check your books. Give me a break. I've spent about 3.5 days a week working on cases all over the state and some outside the state, assisting other states. When I started a number of years back, I kind of mumbled around and, this, that, and the other thing. Now my library's got over 1,000 books in it. I've got videos. I've got pictures. I got so much equipment. My wife's ready to throw me out of my own den because there's no room to move in it anymore. I've got 8 computers going at the same time, and I watch everything. The only way that we're going to get an answer is if we get the information. And how are we going to get that information? We got to look for it. And the Internet's been a super tool for that. And our contact us part of our website is great because I'm getting stuff from people that we just got one from an Air Force officer from back in World War II that we're going to go meet with, who says he has great pictures of Foo Fighters in the Philippines during World War II. And he said they're only 20 feet off the ground. And he said you can actually see what they are. And he said they're just spheres with, he said you can see no seams or anything like that. And he said they're not glowing or anything. He said just like steel balls. And then when you look at pictures of Foo Fighters that were taken in the sky during that time period in World War II, that's exactly what they were. It was a steel ball or metallic-shaped surround circle ball chasing fighters. And one side thought they were theirs, Japs thought they were ours, and we thought they were theirs, and the Nazis thought they were theirs. It was just very confusing. But to have these people now coming forward without being asked to or